Welcome to Season 2, Episode 9 of the Free Spirit Academy podcast with the world's most practical philosopher, Aliyah Washington. Free Spirit Academy is about you being fully you. My name is Randy Moss, and I'm an eating psychology coach and Kundalini yoga teacher, bringing you conversations about freedom. Largely from rigid diets and painful body image, but ultimately it's about the freedom to be yourself. This is about honoring our own bodies and our purest self-expression. Welcome to the podcast. This is truly such a special conversation today, and as I told Allie before we started recording, there is literally nobody in the world that I am more excited to share than her. This is a woman who I not only enjoy as a friend, I resonate with as a fellow teacher, she's also somebody that I deeply respect, and I'm wildly grateful for in that she has taught me so much. And when I asked her what she wanted to be called in the introduction, she said philosopher. And I was like, yeah, totally. And then she paused and was all like, the world's most practical philosopher. And I laughed and I was like, yeah, I'm using it. And in not at all a sarcastic way. If you've been listening since early on this year, you'll have heard Aliyah in episode 2, sharing her journey through anorexia. And today we go much deeper. And I actually split this episode into 2 parts as it got quite long. I didn't want to cut any of it, so this will be part 1, and next week you'll get part 2. And this may be, in fact, it has to be the interview that I prepared for the least. I had a handful of topics I wanted to address, and I was like, I think if I just toss these ideas her way, she's going to run with it, and she did, and it was brilliant. And so I've worried a little as I've merged topics like eating disorder recovery with potentially extreme lifestyles and practices like juicing and colon cleansing that folks could take things to an extreme. And I've tried to be very careful about how I've approached these subjects. And one of the biggest things that we talked about in this conversation was how disordered eating often begins with just the simple desire to feel better when we're in so much pain and discomfort. And because we're in so much pain and discomfort, so many of us tend to reach for the most extreme version of the most extreme thing, whether it's long fasts or technically perfect diets, but without context or transition or embodiment. And I see this happening in the world of exploring spirituality, where there are so many trying to crush our egos or overcome our shadows, or we're jumping into long meditation retreats or taking these, plant medicine journey after plant medicine journey. And again, I think some of this stuff is a natural reaction to wanting to be just out of the pain that we're in as quickly as possible. But truly, it's gentle steps and becoming curious about and understanding our ego and our shadow and our painful habits that will really begin to shift our experience sustainably and allow us to grow rather than chasing our tails and constantly starting over. When I approached the idea of this interview, I wanted to call it something like how to be spiritual or how to cleanse without being crazy or a nut job. And I ultimately decided that was catchy, but it was a little harsh. And I ended up calling it Your Body is on Your Side because Aliyah and I created a program with the same name last year. And we created it with the idea that freedom is so much more than just being free to eat whatever you want or being a certain size or being comfortable at whatever that size is. We introduced the idea that your body is actually your best guide in navigating this human life, and that there is so much beyond the surface of food and weight pain. And this is a course that you can take anytime at your own pace. I will leave the link in the show notes as well as links to Aliyah's other offerings. And now let's get into part 1 of this conversation. You will hear us talk about holistically addressing mental, physical, and spiritual health, big picture, in the long run. We'll hear a bit more about Aliyah's history with anorexia that began with being a very sick child and wanting to feel better. We'll talk about how you think you should feel on any particular diet or healing regimen versus perhaps what you're seeing in reality. How we can begin to make everything in our world right, including our emotions, our symptoms, and any way our body reacts so that we can learn from it. And what's going on when we feel we're eating perfectly, but we're not getting any better or losing weight. So much more. On top of this, I hope you enjoy part 1 of this conversation with Aliyah Washington. So I want to start with a few things that you said in one of your mystery school videos. And I'm piecing together things, but you said we need to marry our mental, emotional, and spiritual work with what we're doing on the physical. And we need to marry the physical work that we're doing with the mental, emotional, and spiritual. If your spirituality, mental work, and emotional work doesn't have a grounding in physical reality, it's incomplete. And I've also found this to be true, which was really the primary reason I wanted to start the podcast. I wanted to hear from folks who were the pros in the healing and wellness and deep tissue cleansing worlds and get their take on the emotional and mental and spiritual, with also a big emphasis on the eating disorder side of things. And then I wanted to talk to people who I thought were amazing in the world of emotions and spirituality. And again, eating disorders, about their take on wellness or cleansing or nourishing the body. Because also what comes with these paths is often a feeling of never being good enough or clean enough or spiritually advanced enough, or we get into any of this with the feeling that the body is wrong. Why is that a limited way of approaching things?
Yeah. So I feel like first and foremost, just before everybody gets overwhelmed, right? Thinking, oh my God, I have to be looking at every single aspect of myself in order to be healing.
Right.
I think we do have to say, like, I say that in the sense of, like, in the long run, we're going to have to look at all of these things. And in the long run, we're going to see how all of these things tie together. And there just really isn't a separation between what we're doing to ourselves physically and what we're doing to ourselves mentally, what we're doing with ourselves emotionally, and our spiritual paths. Like, having been, I came from, I don't know if people know my whole history, but just to, like, briefly say, like, I was born ill. Like, my body didn't work from the very get-go. And I got increasingly sick over my childhood until I ended up on the couch with cysts in my ovaries, high blood pressure, crazy out of control hormones, anxiety, depression, like, completely. I think that I'm sure the next step for me was cancer at that point. And that's when my kind of, like, I'm going to change my life journey started happening. And my eating disorder definitely came from that, right? Like, there was just such a desperation to get better and to fix this body that was so broken. And all the mental and emotional stuff that was going on with that too, like, just having been shamed for how I looked and all of these things. Growing up, my friends were thin, and because of the way my body was, I clearly wasn't. And, like, just all this stuff, right? And I'm just saying that in the beginning, it didn't really seem like there was overlap in necessarily, like, how my healing journey was going in my body and what was going on in my spiritual and emotional life. A lot of the time I felt like my spiritual and my emotional life was actually going a lot better than my physical journey, and that they just didn't have this correlation that I wanted them to. But over time, I've started to just see how just absolutely intimately connected these two things are. And when we can start to get an awareness of that, it does make it easier. I think that's more what I'm trying to get at here. It's not to say that you have to, like, try to be conscious of all of these balls that are in the air, but rather eventually over time, you will become conscious of how all of these balls are already in the air. And that as you're doing things physically, it is affecting you mentally and emotionally. As you're doing things mentally and emotionally, it is affecting you physically. And some of the more frustrating parts of this journey, when the body goes off in this haywire direction after you had, like, an emotional breakthrough and you have no idea why, or when you feel like everything's fine but the body is freaking out. So, like, mentally, emotionally, you think everything's fine, I don't understand what's going on, but my body is melting down. You'll start to see, like, okay, these things are all connected, and I can start to use them as tools to figure out what's going on with me rather than feeling like something's going wrong. So like to lead this into how we can think that the body is doing the wrong thing, right? That just so much in the healing world and in the healing path and all of these things. First thing we have to realize is that a lot of experts and a lot of people who are telling us very, very innocently and kindly and lovely people who are not trying to hurt anybody are talking about diets and talking about lifestyles and talking about healing modalities in a context of this is how it should go. Yes, this is how you should feel when you do this. This is the result you should get when you do this diet or that diet or this healing modality or that healing modality. And so much of the time, the reality of where our bodies actually are at and how they're going to react to this or that thing is a completely different thing than the philosophical what should happen. And rather than understanding that our bodies are our guides and they are not ever wrong, they are not ever having a symptom for no reason. And this is something that I think hopefully I can make click in this podcast, if nothing else clicks in this podcast, is just that your body is never making it up. Your body is never doing the wrong thing that it shouldn't do. It's always doing the right thing and showing us that our theory, our philosophy of what should happen when we do this thing, that is what was wrong, right? But we are so caught up in this idea that the words are true, the philosophy is true, what these experts are saying is true, and if that's not what's happening to me, my body is wrong and broken. Rather than saying, if that's not what's happening to me, the theory is incorrect. Does this make sense?
Yeah. And I think that just to encourage people out there, if this is an idea that's sort of a big one or a new one, this is not a common way of thinking. This is not, this is very, very unusual out there in the worlds of healing. The very common thing from the diet world, from the healing world, any of these worlds of growth is that something is wrong and you need to fix it.
Right.
And that our body could possibly be wrong and that we need to fix it and that it's our fault.
Yes. And think of this is just like diet mentality 101.
Yes.
Right? You go on the diet, it works for a couple of weeks, then something happens where either the diet stops working, right? Your body just rebels, quote unquote. Or you mentally and emotionally break and have a binge or can't stick with it or whatever. And the automatic assumption, right, that the diet industry tells us is you fucked up.
Right.
It wasn't the diet's fault. The diet is perfect. And right, you got some results for a couple of weeks until you fell off of it.
Exactly.
So it works. It's you. It's you that's fucked up. It's your body that didn't behave the way it was supposed to. Your body rebelled. Right? And we carry this assumption, this just fundamental assumption that our bodies are rebelling from trying to be healthy. That our bodies are against us and against healing and something we need to wrangle, right? Everything is marketed to us as battle of the bulge, fight your cravings, fight your body, blah, blah, blah. And this is just so entrenched that even when we get into like trying to heal, we still have this idea that it is the body that's fundamentally broken. And of course, that's an easy message when you're feeling ill and you're feeling sick in your body, even if you're feeling sick in your emotions and all these things, right? To just say like, well, obviously my body is broken. I don't feel good, right? If my body wasn't broken, if I didn't have to fix my body, why would I feel so shitty? And so it's just so easy. It's so easy to just completely own this mentality of my body is broken and I have to fix it, including my appetite is broken or my willpower is broken or, right? I couldn't stick to diet.
My body doesn't want to be healthy.
Yes, my body doesn't want to be healthy.
My body wants to hold this extra weight.
Exactly. And so, yes, it is a completely radical way of looking at things. But again, this is sort of how we're raised as human beings in general in culture, is to just assume we're wrong, right? That if you have an emotional reaction to something that seems inappropriate, your emotion was just wrong. Figure that emotion out. Take an antidepressant. Take an anti-anxiety medication. Get rid of that emotion because it doesn't make sense. Yeah? You say something. Oh, why did you say that? What's wrong with me? Don't do that. Censor myself. Just every turn, every impulse. This is the thing that I'd like to do with my life. Your parents tell you, you'll never make money at that. Be more practical. It's just with religion, with science, with school, just everywhere in this culture, we are told left, right, and center. Your initial impulse is wrong.
Absolutely. And so we can't blame ourselves for any of it. Like, it's so innocent. We've been doing our best the whole time.
Yes. And this is exactly how we have to start looking at ourselves, right? Like, this is where, when all the healers and all the people are like, have compassion for yourself, have compassion. It's like, okay, but what does that fucking mean? What do you mean have compassion for myself? What does it look like to have compassion for myself? What is that actually? Right? And that rate is, it is really saying, okay, whoa, I have literally been blaming myself for everything that I am for most of my life. No wonder I'm exhausted. No wonder I'm confused. No wonder I think my body is against me. No wonder I think my mind is against me. No wonder I don't feel like I can get my shit in control, because I have a guidance system. That's my emotions and my body. They've been talking to me my entire life, and I've been trained for my entire life to ignore them, right? But we have to understand there's no way to turn our emotional guidance system off. You can't actually turn your emotions off. You can't actually stop your body from telling you when things are right and things are wrong from you. You can't actually shut that down. We can take drugs, we can take alcohol, we can use food, we can use these tools to numb the message, but we're always going to come down from the drug. We're always going to, right? The high is not going to last. Right. And then those emotions and those feelings are going to be there. And again, we've been all taught now to just run from ourselves in the quest to fix ourselves. Absolutely. And get ourselves where we want to be. Right. We've been trained to completely ignore the tools we have. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
And I want to emphasize that none of this is for anybody to feel guilty about. Like, it's probably going to be really hard to be compassionate with yourself at first, because again, like, this is all of the wiring and training that you've had your whole life, and it's going to take time to realize that it's safe and that it's okay to be kind to yourself.
Yeah. And so, like, this is what I was saying, this is where the compassion starts. Is that, like, we as a society have completely misunderstood our bodies and our minds and our emotions and all of these messengers that we have. And that was innocent because, right, we have, as a humanity, such a low understanding of what actually is required for the human being to thrive. This is what we got to understand. Society doesn't have it figured out, right? And we know this. We've seen this and heard this 100 million times. People lose the weight, they're still not happy. People have the $1 million success, they're still not happy. People who are at the top are just as miserable as people at the bottom. So, like, what's going on here? Well, it means that what we think we figured out success to be, we haven't. We haven't really figured it out. And what we think should make us happy doesn't. What we think shouldn't make us happy does. Like, we're just really lost as a humanity. And so if you're lost as a human, it's not your fault. It's just not your fault. If you feel like you have all of these just misunderstandings with your body, and you still feel like your body's against you and it's against being healthy, and it's sabotaging you, and you're sabotaging yourself, and like, what's wrong with you that you can't get your shit together? Mm. The message here is it's not your fault. You can do something about it, and we're going to talk about that. But the first thing is to realize that blaming yourself for the fact that you're in this position is silly. It's just silly because it's not your fault. You did not design culture. You did not raise yourself, right, with this awareness that your emotions and your body had all this information, and you just chose to obfuscate it. That is not what happened. Yeah, you did not have the awareness that you just chose to go in the other direction. That would be something we could kick ourselves for. But none of us did that. And even if you feel like you did that, even if you feel like, no, I did know that my body had something and I just ignored it, or I just shut it down, you were so indoctrinated to do that again, you can't blame yourself. And now I just want to put a caveat in here. Mm-hmm. If you're on antidepressants, or if you're on drugs, or if you're doing any of these things that I mentioned there that shut down emotions, and are hearing me say that that's wrong, that is not what I mean. Okay. Exactly. I'm not telling anyone to go off your antidepressants. I'm not telling anyone that taking drugs or drinking alcohol or any of these things is wrong or bad. They aren't. Okay. We are all on a bridge. Yes. And we are all on a journey. And I am not against pharmaceuticals. I'm not against anything. I am for what the right next step is for every individual. And that's what we need to start to get our minds wrapped around. Yes, is that in this world, there are no good and bad things. There are beneficial and not beneficial things. And that's a completely different mindset. And so even if we can start to look at the body and what is next for us in our healing journey, right? If we can, because, everyone says in the healing world, get rid of good and bad, right and wrong. There's just, but the problem with that is that there is a structure. Right. It's not a free for all. It's not just whatever I want it to be is the answer. Right. And we know this. Yes. When we are first recovering from eating disorder and we need to just go and eat everything. Yeah. Have no rules. Let all the boundaries off. Go, like I said, eat all the foods that you've never let yourself have, all your fear foods. That is so important. Because we have to see that, like, you don't die. Yes. Right? You gain weight. Okay. Just like all of these things that we're so afraid of, we have to face it, and we have to see that nothing actually catastrophic happens. Like, our worst nightmares don't come true. It's this happens. But at some point, everyone gets to the point where they realize, like, okay, yeah, I'm doing this, but eating chocolate cake every day isn't actually making my body feel good. Mm-hmm. This doesn't actually feel like freedom anymore. And I think that, Randy, you have said this many, many times, that that's what happened on your journey, right? Oh, absolutely. It's like there was that turning point where the chocolate cake every day felt like freedom until it felt like it.
Yeah, it felt like freedom until it didn't feel like freedom.
Exactly, until it felt like it was caging you again. And
I wanted to talk about this, but I actually think it would be really, really useful for people to hear what this turning point was like for you, because you were talking earlier about how there was a time when you felt like you were connected in your spiritual life and you were doing this mental and emotional work, but it was like the physical stuff that was just way out, that you didn't see, each of these mirroring each other yet. So what was this part of the journey like for you when you were moving through the disordered eating and you were welcoming food into your life, and how was that affecting you on all levels?
Yeah. So again, for me, I think I don't even want to say that mine's like a complicated version of what normal people go through. Mm-hmm. Mine was just like an amplified version of what people go through, right? Because my body was sick. And I had like real medical issues. Like, my colon was probably, if my parents had been on top of me enough, like normal parents who take their children to the doctor when they're sick, they would have taken my colon out. Like, I know this for a fact. Because I have a cousin who had her colon removed, and I had all the same symptoms she had. because she had colitis.
Mm-hmm.
And so and then I've taken a genetic test and I'm just like so predisposed to having colitis. It's not even funny. So I had colitis, I'm pretty sure, as a child. I had, like I said, cysts on my ovaries. I had hormones totally out of control, blood sugar levels totally out of control. Like my body was in really rough shape before an eating disorder, like way before. This was just me growing up as a teenager in the regular world, as a child and then into my teens. And this is why I say, like, in some ways, my eating disorder, because of the way that I did it, kind of bought me time, I think. As crazy as that might sound. Anyways, that's just kind of like a weird thing to think about, but it is sort of, I think, what happened for me is that I stopped eating not just because I wanted to be thin,
Right.
but my body was so broken down and so in a bad state that I think a little bit for me, there was a little bit of healing that happened. And of course I took it way too far and then it started to make me sick again. But just kind of like to put that out there that like my physical situation was very, very dire, and it wasn't just wanting to be thin. And then I feel like I see this mirrored in everyone who's ever had an eating disorder, that there was this sense that there's something wrong with my body. And I don't think that's just magazine culture telling us you're not thin enough.
Right.
Because every woman on the planet is being sold that message. Like, maybe not in the whole planet,
right,
but every woman who's exposed to Western culture is being given this message. And it doesn't drive all of us to starve ourselves to death or to binge and purge. You see, it doesn't have the same effect on everybody. So there's something else going on when you're someone who's going to take it to an extreme. Because we have to understand how hard it is mentally, emotionally, and physically, spiritually, to starve yourself. Right? Like, especially if you go down the route of anorexia. It's like, have you ever spoken to anyone who's just trying to do a diet because they want to lose weight? Like, when that's the motivating factor, you don't stick to it. It's too hard. Right? Like, I know people, especially, and I think that Randy, you can probably agree here, that like, even in the cleansing world where people it's not so physically focused in the sense of wanting to be thin,
right,
but wanting to heal something. Yes. Like, even people who are like in physical pain because of their physical problems, and they're told this fast is going to help you, still can't do it. Right? Even when you have this motivation of just like, I just want to feel better, I'm in pain all the time, not eating is going to help me, we still can't do it because it's hard, right? It goes against survival in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so if we can get ourselves to a place where we're able to accomplish that on a regular basis, there is something else going on. Yes? Mm-hmm. So for me, I was like everyone else, starved myself, did the whole anorexia thing. And again, like, not everything that I did in my eating disorder was normal eating disorder stuff. Like, I wasn't just eating the low calorie packaged food in order to have the least amount of calories. Like, right? My thing was, I was eating like a pure raw foods diet, and I wouldn't let any crumb that wasn't like the most pure high level food cross my lips. Mm-hmm. And so there was, like I say, a degree of heading in the right direction, but doing this incredibly in a disordered way. And the reason I like the word disordered is because, again, it was a seed of truth. Mm-hmm. And again, this is another like radical idea that Randy and I both have about eating disorders, about everything. that there isn't anything in life that's inherently good or bad.
Right.
Everything is founded in truth. Everything, even the biggest lie, has a seed of truth, because if it didn't, it could not exist. And I know that that's kind of like a weird concept to think about, but if there was absolutely no truth to something, it could not exist in this reality, because everything in this reality is built upon something. And for me, the definition of truth is simply reality.
Mm-hmm.
So if something has no basis in reality, how could it exist in this reality?
Right.
Yes? So truth is always just reality. That's all truth is. When we're tapping into higher wisdom or higher guidance or all this spiritual woo-woo shit, what we really mean is, I'm seeing reality for closer to how it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When we have a miracle or things happen that are how they should happen, right? Our version of reality and actual reality align. Most of us would call that a miracle,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is simply us understanding how the reality works. So
I love that you're saying this, and I'm going to go off on just a little side bit because I really, really like this piece. But do you find that I should say, there's a lot of people in the spiritual community who are using spirituality, I'm using air quotes, to get away from reality, or at least get away from their reality, or perhaps they don't want to know what reality is, but there's a lot of, sounds very magical and it must be spiritual, so it must be better than everything else, which feels kind of better than what they were doing before. Yes.
Okay. So again, right? These crazy 8 cycles that we as humans do, right? I don't want my reality because it's so painful. So I'm going to go to spiritual world that tells me there are no rules. It's all just in my head. Whatever I believe, it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And if I just believe hard enough, if I just sit in my room and manifest hard enough, if
I pray over this burger will be healthy.
Exactly. If I send positive vibes to my burger, it's going to be good for me. Mm-hmm. If I just law of attraction my way into whatever I want, I can have it. Yeah. Because of course, right? That feels so much better than there are all these laws and all these rules and you don't know what any of them are. And therefore you can never have what you want. Yeah. Because you don't know how the rules work. Right. And this is the foundation of religion. This is the foundation of education. This is the foundation of every system we have. It's simply humanity trying to figure out the rules so that we can get what we want. That's all this is. And so we have to understand that, of course, if we've been raised with all these rules that don't work, right? So this ties this in.
Yes.
All these things that we've been told, if you just do this, this, and this, you're going to get this result. Yes. And we do this, this, and this, and we don't get that result, right? Eventually, something's got to give. We either think we're so fucked up, there's something so bad and wrong and broken with us, and we just keep pushing forward with the rules, hoping one day it's going to work how it's supposed to work, believing that the reason that it isn't is because of us. There's something inherently flawed within me that's making it so that the rules don't work. Mm-hmm. Or we're going to crazy 8 cycle, which is a term I got from Tony Robbins, which just means I'm going to swing to the opposite, which is equally untrue or disordered, right? But it feels so different and so new, it must be better, which says there are no rules. It's just all whatever I want it to be. I'm in this situation because of my low vibes and I just need to heal my vibes. And so what we're saying is,
which people are, I don't know if you were going to go here, but I feel like it lines up with the food, and it can be, I feel like, an evolution and a natural phase. So like with food, we come from diets, which is just good, bad, right, wrong, or I'm good, bad, right, and wrong for eating this, evolving into like, well, I can just eat whatever I want and listen to my body, whether or not we're actually listening to our body. But that's growth. And then eventually you grow beyond that, or you do that crazy 8 thing. So it's mirrored there too.
Exactly. So this is the thing, right? Starting to realize that this mirror has always been there. You're not gonna start to have it now that you're aware of it. It's kind of like the same. My thing is always this: reality is what it is. right? Gravity always existed. When we came up with the formula for gravity, it's not like in that moment everything fell to the earth.
Right.
Just because we don't understand it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Right. I think I always want to infuse a lot of hope into words that we tend to think of as real downers. Like, I think that
Yeah.
people can hear the word reality and we're so used to like, oh, get back to reality, get back to the grind. Yeah. And the way that you're describing it, I'm hoping that people will just take it in as like, oh, we're just figuring out how this stuff works.
Yes.
And it makes sense that like we don't want to look at that because it's scary and hard to admit that we don't know, and that there's lots and lots and lots of stuff we don't know. And it can actually be really exciting as we start to put more and more pieces together.
Yes. So hopefully by me kind of telling how I got through this, you'll see why this is like hope. This is not, oh my God, this is horrible. Okay. So you asked me, right? Like, what was the journey for me going from feeling like all of these pieces were disconnected to feeling like these pieces were connected? So again, I was sick, all these things, eating disorder, blah, blah, blah. And then I got to the point in my eating disorder where I had recovered the weight. I was eating normal, da, da, da. And then I went back on my raw foods diet because there was something in me that knew that this was the right thing. Mm-hmm. And I tried for years again, after eating disorder recovery, to do my raw foods diet perfect. And this was the 30 bananas a day time when everyone was like binging on fruit and all this stuff that was going on. And for me, I had a lot of, again, influence of the world telling me this is how it should go. This is how you should do it. Like when you eat this way, your colon and your intestine should heal and all these things should start to get better. And these things should start to work better and you should start to feel better about yourself. And all of these things should. If you're doing it right, all these things should happen, right? And so I was trying to do it right. And just like everyone else, I couldn't stick to these perfect diets. I couldn't eat the way that these perfect people were saying that they were eating. And at the same time, even when I could for short stretches of time, it actually made me feel worse. Mm-hmm. I knew I was on the right track with it. I knew that there was something about this way of living that worked because even in the beginning, when I first found raw foods and it wasn't an eating disorder yet, it was the best I had ever felt, right? So like coming from being sick your whole life to all of a sudden there was some ray of sunshine, right? This is part of the reason why I think I took it to such an extreme was because it was the first thing that ever actually gave me relief from my symptoms in the first place.
Right.
And so of course I ran with it, like just being an extreme person. I was like, okay, well, if this is the end, right? If some is good, more is better. Yep. So if some fruit is good, only fruit. If some fasting is good, mostly fasting. Like this kind of mentality. So again,
you find yourself like on and off of that, or because your tendency towards more extremes, did you stick to it and you weren't getting the degree of wellness that you thought you should be getting?
Yeah, basically I ate like what most people would probably consider like a ridiculously pristine raw foods diet for like 3 years after my weight recovery and didn't lose an ounce. Like I was like the only kind of chubby, like long-term raw foodist probably anyone had ever seen.
I don't think so. There was a lot of stuff on YouTube. A lot
that's true.
Of unhappy people.
Yes, that's true. But I guess back in the day, I was the only one I knew at the time. Right? Like looking at these long-term fruitarians at the time who had been doing it for only like maybe like a year or two longer than me or something like this. And they were all...
Were you like, something's wrong with my body, something's wrong with me? Or were you just... Yes.
No, definitely. I was like, this is fucked up. I shouldn't look like this. Right? Like this isn't right. And also too, right? Like I shouldn't feel this way.
Right.
I've been doing everything so right for so long. Like only eating the purest fruit and blah, 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 blah. And still my colon doesn't work. Still I'm miserable in my body. Like all of these things. It wasn't just the weight. everything wasn't getting better. And so I reached this tipping point where all of these pieces started to come together, where I basically said, like, look, I have been telling myself that I have the answer this whole time, right? If I can just stick to this raw foods diet, if I can just do this thing right, it's going to work. And I sat there and I was sitting on an island in Thailand with my boyfriend at the time. And it had been like my dream to be in Thailand. I tell this story all the time. I had wanted to be in Thailand for a really long time. It was just like this dream thing that was happening. So many other pieces of my life were coming together, right? Like I found the love of my life. I had started working what was at the time like my dream job. I was basically the wellness director of an online company that let me like work remotely from wherever I wanted all over the world, helping people with skills that I actually had, which was just like so amazing for me. And lots of things in my life were going really great considering things. And I was just so miserable. Like I just could not enjoy any of it because my body hurt so bad.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting because I have heard you tell this story multiple times and I never made the connection that it was because you physically felt unwell.
Yeah. And I think that this is something that I never even realized was such a huge thing either, because I was just used to being in chronic pain.
I was going to say, were you just used to feeling this way all the time?
I was. And it's not even until like very recently, like the last couple of years, that I realized that that wasn't normal.
Wow.
Like I literally just started to realize that I was someone who had chronic pain. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know that that was what I was experiencing. I thought everyone felt like they wanted to die after they ate. Wow. Like I remember looking around the world and like people like eating lunch and then going back to their work. And I was just like, how do you do that? Because like my stomach hurts no matter what I eat. And like after I eat, there is pain, like period, end of story. It's not, will there be pain? It's how much pain will there be? And I just thought that was normal. I remember, I tell this story. I was really into working out as I was a really, really weird teenager. I got my babysitting license when I was 12, and I think I babysat every weekend, every Friday and Saturday night from the time I was 12 to the time I was 16, and I could get a real job. And again, like I got into this health and wellness stuff like at 14 because, like I said, I that moment on the couch in grade 8 where I realized my body was falling apart and no one was going to help me. I just took it into my own hands. I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I put myself on diets. I started researching. I read every diet book there was. I started cooking for myself. I used my money that I was getting from babysitting to buy my own food. Like I was like, I'm going to fix myself. And so there's this one lady that I used to babysit for who had like these old like 70s workout tapes when women were just starting to get into weightlifting. And so I would do these like little strength routines. And she said in this video, if any of these exercises hurt, stop. Because all that's going to teach you to do if you keep working through it is to work through pain. And that's silly. And she laughed. And I remember thinking, what are you talking about? If you don't know how to work through pain, how will you get anything done ever?
Well, and I think that we should say, I'm going to pause you for a moment because you're so great at getting back on track. Another reason why I like having these conversations is because I feel like people that move through the disordered eating piece and they're in the kind of eating whatever you want, a lot of them don't feel well. And a lot of them don't even realize it because they think this is normal or they've always felt a certain way or they've grown up on processed foods and a lot of stress or whatever the thing is. But I'd like for you to talk about why even, and here's what I should say too, is that a lot of people kind of just pop a pill and deal with the pain.
Yes. Okay. So for me, I always have had an aversion to drugs. And some of this is because like my mom was a little bit of a natural hippie, but not really. Like she didn't really know a lot. But like she, right, like she wasn't one of these informed hippies.
Yeah.
She was just like, no. But the main thing for me was that painkillers never worked. I could take 4 Advil and it wouldn't touch my stomach ache. I could take antidepressants, and I did. I was on antidepressants at one point in my life, like during my anorexia recovery, for like 6 months. And I just stopped taking them one day. Like I didn't wean myself off or anything and didn't notice anything. But, and I'm not saying that people should do this. I'm just saying for me, it was because it never worked. They just never did anything. There was no painkiller. And so now I know, again, I've taken genetic tests and I realize that I, genetically speaking, can't break down drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a reason that it didn't work for me. And that was that my body simply doesn't work that way. And I also think that, like, combine that with how messed up my digestion system was. Even if I could break them down, I probably at that point wouldn't have been able to. Mm. So that's the reason for me. I never was able. So like, that's kind of like a weird blessing and a curse in my life, right? I was never able to numb the pain. And this, again, was mirrored in every area of my life. There was no shutting down the emotions. There was no calming things down. There was, like, I couldn't eat and feel numbed out. Mm-hmm. Like everyone else has at least some hours of bliss in the eating thing. Yeah. And I could like eat, and all I would sit there and be like, okay, so I just sat there and ate, and now I have a stomach ache. Like it never really did for me what it was supposed to do. Does this make sense?
Yeah. And I'm sure at this point, having come as far as you have come, you're probably pretty grateful for that. I'm sure it didn't feel like a blessing.
Because this was the thing, right? It was the awareness that was either going to save me or that was going to kill me.
Right.
I really think that about waking up, quote unquote, right? That this journey of becoming aware will either be the thing that saves you or it will be the thing that kills you. And I don't know how to say it in any other way, right? Like when people are like, I want to go on this enlightenment journey and I want to go on this spiritual journey, I'm like, I don't know that you do want to do that because it's going to ruin a lot of things for you. and like, we just kind of have to be realistic about that like, yes, of course, there are things in reality of this is just how things work, that when we first become aware of it, we're just like, fuck, that sucks. Right? I don't want that to be how it is. If I had a penny for every time I saw something and was like, are you kidding? Right? That's how it works. No, I don't want that to be how it works. I would be a billionaire. But there's a huge but. The but is this. When you understand how the system works, you're gonna eventually realize that it is not the system and how reality works ever that's holding us back from having what we want. Right. Because if there was no system, if there was no structure, if there was no rules or laws to the way that reality is governed, right? And some people call these the universal laws, the natural laws, the whatever you want to call it. There could be no existence. So we have to understand that, right? If Plato doesn't have a structure at all, it has no boundaries, it has no physical laws governing it, it doesn't exist. Right. You can't create with something that doesn't exist. So what we're really saying here is that when we discover how reality works, and this is something we continue to discover for the rest of our lives. I don't believe we ever just wake up one day and are enlightened in the sense that you get it now. You just see all of reality, how all of it works, and you don't need to do things anymore. Because like, what would be the point of that? There would be no more learning and no more growth and no more expansion. And this is going to get off into a totally esoteric place, but like the universe is still expanding. You're never going to know all the laws and rules, because every single time we figure out a law and a rule, there's a desire in us to create something within that, which then expands that law and rule, which then we now have something new to learn. So we're never going to get to having it all figured out. But again, that does not mean a life of pain.
Right.
This just means,
yes.
Yes, this just means
a moment of like, oh shit, you're
yes.
right. And I don't like that very much for people.
Yes. No. What it really means is that when we start to get these basics understood, right, we can then operate within the way the system functions and start living a life where we are generally getting what we want.
Mm-hmm.
When you know how the structure works, you can adjust yourself accordingly to get what you want.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. For more on food and body freedom, get my free ebook, The Eat to Feel Good Diet, by signing up for newsletter updates at freespirit-academy.com. I will be back with you next week.